Hey everyone, welcome to our Good Friday sermon, and I trust that you're having a good long weekend so far. Irrespective of when you're going to watch the sermon, I pray that today's sermon and message will be a blessing to you. So if I were to ask you, what is the focal point of Christianity? What would you say? I think many of us will be tempted to say all kinds of things about the wonderful tenets of our faith. And I think so many of us are so hesitant to say that the focal point of Christianity is the death and resurrection of Jesus, because we are so used to the concept of the cross. From the cross that is on top of the steeple of a church to the cross that hangs around our neck, we're so used to the concept and notion of the cross that I fear that in many of our lives, whether you're a Christian or non-Christian, that the notion and the wisdom and the power of the cross has completely lost its aspect on our lives. And so I want to put a stake on the ground here today and say that Christianity does rise and fall on the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Leaders of every movement have had most of their impact while they were still alive, because while they were still alive, they were trying to galvanize followers to follow their movements. They were trying to teach some of their truths and some of their ways and do things that were revolutionary in that sense. And so most of the impact that leaders had of various movements was during the time that they were alive. And Jesus himself, even while he was alive, he taught many wondrously profound things. He did many amazing miracles, and he broke many societal norms of the day. And he did a lot of these things that leaders of many movements have done. But Jesus has had his most impact through his death and not his life necessarily. Jesus has had his most impact through his death and his resurrection in human history. And so what we'll be looking at today is the two sides of Good Friday, the two sides of the cross, because in every single situation, there are always two sides to it, aren't there? Take marriage counseling, for example, of which I do a lot of. You will hear the husband say one thing and you will believe that that is the full picture of what is going on because it sounds so good. It sounds so true. Yet you'll hear the wife's version of the story and you'll wonder and think, man, what she's saying is also true. And there's two sides to this marriage and you don't quite know which one to believe. Similarly, with Good Friday, there are two sides to Good Friday. And the question is, for you and for me, which side are you on? There's always two sides. Look at the current Russia and Ukraine war, for example. There's two sides to that war. There's a side that you hear from the mainstream media, the side of BBC and CNN and SABC and what NATO and what all of those guys are saying. And they keep on saying Russia has invaded Ukraine without any cause. Vladimir Putin is evil. He has caused many families to be separated. He has caused the death of thousands of people. There's elements of truth to what that side is saying. But then there's the other side, the side of what Vladimir Putin is saying, the side of the fact that the politicians and even the president of Ukraine are corrupt, the sides of the fact that they themselves are persecuting a lot of Russians, the side which says that half of Ukraine actually want Russia to come and invade because half of them are pro-Russian and have Russian roots and backgrounds. And so that's one side, the other side of the story that has elements of truths to it. But if you look at both sides of the story, they have elements of truths to them, but which is the true side of the story? And so in today's message, I'm hoping, friends, that as I preach and as I present to you the two sides of Good Friday, I hope you will see that both sides have validity to them, but I hope you will decide on the side that I am on, because the side that I am on, I believe, is the true side. Let me carry on. I'm going to read to you from 1 Corinthians 1:18 to 19, because the same historical event will always have two responses. The same historical event of Jesus Christ has always had two responses to it. So let me read for you from 1 Corinthians 1:18 to 19. This is what Paul says. He says, "For the word of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but it is the power of God to us who are being saved. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and I will set aside the intelligence of the intelligent. So right off the bat already Paul is saying that the word of the cross, Christ crucified on the cross, is foolishness to one group of people, and it is the power of God to another group of people. It is foolishness to those who are perishing. In other words, those who are headed for destruction, those who are headed for God's judgment. When they look at the cross, it is just foolishness to them because it is just a man dying on a cross. Whereas to the other group of people, those who are being saved, it is the power of God. It is something that defines who they are. How can the same historical event, friends, mean two different things to two different groups of people? How can we say that? Well, if you were a modern day salesman, I don't know these days if there are salesmen who go from door to door knocking on people's houses, wanting to sell something to people. I remember in the 80s and in the early 90s, where I grew up in India, often we would have these salesmen coming and knocking on our front door, and we would open the door, and here they were with a bag full of their products, and they would just ask if they could come in, and my mom would let them in, and they would lay out their products before us and then want to sell us something. But if you were a door-to-door salesman like these people were, you would want to make your product very, very appealing. I mean, that's what marketing is all about, right? Marketing will tell you that if you want to sell a product, you must present the most attractive and the best version of your product so that it's appealing to the eye. It's appealing to all of your senses. It's appealing to your sense of taste and style. That's what marketing will tell you. And so if I was to try and sell Christianity to you, why would I sell a man bloodied and battered and bruised, hanging on a cross, dying a very painful and slow death? This is not visually appealing to anyone. So why would I be selling that to you if I was trying to sell Christianity to you? Yet, as a Christian, I will tell you that to the naked eye, to the human eye, to human wisdom, this is not appealing at all. But this is the wisdom of God. Because death on a cross, friends, was shameful and dishonorable. It was the worst way to die. Hanging on a cross was the worst way to die, and it's still today the worst way to die, because you would hang on a cross. Both your feet would be asphyxiated to the cross. Basically, a nail would be driven through both your feet and both your hands as well. So you would hang there and literally be drowning in your own liquid, in your own blood, because you would struggle to breathe from the way you were hung on the cross. So you would try and push yourself up ever so slowly and take a gulp of breath, and then obviously go back down again and hang. So it was the worst way to die. You would die a very slow and painful death, as you had less and less breath in your lungs, as you can take in less and less breath. But Jesus died an even more horrific death, because he was scourged before he went to the cross. And so in other words, the cat of nine tails, which is basically a whip with three leather strands on it, and at the end of each strands are pieces of sharded or broken glass and animal bones and nails that were at the end of those what you would call cat of nine tails, at the end of those leather strips. And Jesus was lashed with this on his body 39 times. And so as the Roman soldiers beat his body, those glasses and nails and bones would cling onto his flesh, and every time they pulled the whip back, it would rip out pieces of his flesh. And so by the time Jesus was crucified on the cross, he was already bleeding so much blood. And so that's why Jesus actually died 6 hours after being hung on the cross, because he was losing so much fluid and blood. When people were hung on a cross, they were actually used to hang on the cross for days. But because Jesus had already suffered so much already, his body could only handle another 6 hours. Why would I sell you this if I was trying to sell Christianity? I love what Brian Bill says about this. He says, the word of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. It stands in contradiction to all the philosophy, education, and knowledge of this world. For the preaching of the cross puts the sentence of death upon them all. Christianity neither flatters human beings nor presents God in an easily palatable form. Let me say that again. Christianity neither flatters human beings nor presents God in an easily palatable form, because it's trying to say to you, look, this is what Christianity is about. It's about a man dying on a cross. This doesn't flatter you in any way, but it's also not palatable because it presents the horrific death of the Son of God on a cross. I love what Paul is saying here in our text, because he's actually quoting Isaiah 29:14. When he says that I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and I will set aside the intelligence of the intelligent, he is quoting Isaiah 29:14. And the background of what's going on here is that the nation of Israel is about to be invaded by the Assyrians. They're coming from the north. It's similar to what is happening in Ukraine, or what happened a few months ago, where the Ukrainians knew that Russia was assembling their military might. It was assembling their tanks and their armies and their missiles and their rockets. They were coming to invade Ukraine, and Ukraine knew that they would invade any single day. This is exactly what's going on here in Isaiah, where the Israelites knew that the Assyrian army was coming to invade them. They had assembled their troops right in front of Jerusalem. And so Israel sent word to Egypt. They were trying to negotiate a treaty with Egypt, almost saying that, Egypt, if you try and help us, so we're going to try and help you, and we need your help to try and defeat the Assyrians. This was a lot of politicizing and a political scheming going on. But yet God sent word to them through the prophet Isaiah, and he sent word to their king saying, you're trying to sort out your situation, your mess, your imminent invasion from the Assyrians by your own human wisdom. But I'm going to do it out of my own wisdom. And that's why he said, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise. I will set aside the intelligence of the intelligent. This is what God did for them. Because the king of Assyria, when they assembled in front of Jerusalem, he sent Isaiah a word. He sent the king of Israel a word, and he says, you guys better surrender now, because we have got your city surrounded and you're about to be defeated and invaded. And yet the king of Israel presents this letter that he got before God, and he says, Lord, what are we going to do? Our enemy is on our doorstep. We're about to be invaded. And God says to them, you've been trying to sort this out by trying to forge an alliance with Egypt, but I'm going to sort it out for you. And what happened that night is God sent an angel to bring about a plague in and amongst the Assyrian army. And the next morning, the Israelites discovered that 185,000 soldiers died that very night from this plague that was unleashed by this angel. Friends, here's what Paul is trying to tell you. Our way to salvation is foolishness, and God is going to destroy our way to salvation by his own way. He's going to do something super miraculous that we will think is impossible in our day. And this is what Paul is saying about the cross of Christ, because in human wisdom, this seems like foolishness. How can we all be saved by a man dying on a cross? And man's wisdom, friends, has not accomplished anything. Look at what man's wisdom has tried to do. In the last century alone, we've gone from modernism to postmodernism. We've gone from sexual revolution to gender equality. We've gone from relativism to the New Age movement. We've gone from politicians and politics to revolutionists. We've gone from dictators to freedom fighters. We've gone from democracy to totalitarianism. We've gone from the UN to NATO. We've gone from the National Party to the ANC. Have they been able to sort out the problems of mankind? No, they have not been able to. Friends, this is man's wisdom. Man's wisdom trying to sort out man's problems. And we've amounted to nothing. Nothing. We are worse off than we have before. And in our arrogance, in our pride as human beings, we think that we can sort out man's problems by human wisdom. And here, God is saying human wisdom has not been able to sort out man's problems. We look at God's presentation of sorting out our problem and we say, that's foolishness. The cross of Christ is foolishness to those who are headed for destruction, but it is the power of God and the wisdom of God to those who are being saved. Let me carry on to what Paul is saying here. He says, where is the one who is wise? Where is the teacher of the law? Where is the debater of this age? Hasn't God made the world's wisdom foolish? For since in God's wisdom the world did not know God through wisdom, God was pleased to save those who believe through the foolishness of what is being preached. This is what Paul is saying here. He's not trying to belittle the wisdom of the world. He's not trying to belittle the wise. He's not saying, where's the one who is wise? Where's the teacher of the law? He's not saying that you guys are stupid. He's not trying to patronize the wisdom of the world. He's not trying to condescend the wisdom of the world. But here's what he's trying to do. He's trying to expose their inability to save mankind through their human wisdom. Paul is trying to expose our inability to save mankind through our human wisdom. And in verse 21, when he says, the world did not know God, that word for know is not an intellectual knowledge of God, but it's an intimate relationship with God. He says the world did not have an intimate relationship with God. They did not know God. That is why we're not able to have access to salvation. The highest IQ, the greatest intellect, the wisest man cannot know God intimately and personally except through the cross of Jesus Christ. Because the things of God are discerned by the Spirit of God, and it is God Himself who has to show you His wisdom in terms of how He saves mankind through the cross of Christ. Because in terms of human wisdom, it is foolishness. I love what 1 Corinthians 2:13-14 says. Paul carries on later on and he says, we also speak these things not in words taught by human wisdom, but in those taught by the Spirit, explaining spiritual things to spiritual people. But the person without the Spirit does not receive what comes from God's Spirit, because it is foolishness to him. He's not able to understand it since it is evaluated spiritually. So in other words, you will never understand the things of God. You will never understand the cross of Christ unless the Spirit of God Himself reveals the meaning of the cross to you, friends. I love what John MacArthur says. He says, every time a person looks at a mountain, he should think of God's greatness. Every time he sees the sunset, he should think of God's glory. Every time he sees a new life come into the world, he should see God's creative hand at work. Yet, an astronomer cannot look or can look through his telescope and see 100,000 stars and not see God's greatness. A natural scientist can look through his microscope and see intricacies of life beyond description, yet not see God's creation. A nuclear physicist can produce 1,000 megatons of destruction, yet not recognize God's power. Here's what MacArthur is saying. He's saying you can directly stare at the marvelous, wonderful, powerful, greatest act of salvation that God has ever performed for mankind. You can stare at Jesus and the cross and yet still not get it, because it has to be shown to you by the Spirit of God, because out of your own human wisdom it is foolishness to you. And then he carries on in verse 22 and 23 of our text. He says, for the Jews ask for signs and the Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to the Jews and foolishness to the Gentiles. Once again, Paul is saying here, there are two groups here that represent mankind, the Jews and the Greeks. The Jews want signs. They say, if I see it, then I will believe it. But I want to tell you today that a sign is not enough to save a hardened, rebellious heart. A sign is not enough. A sign is not enough to convince us that we need salvation through the cross of Christ. A sign is not enough to change an apathetic soul. Wisdom is not enough Because it is not our intellect that needs convincing, friends. It's not your mind that needs convincing. It is our soul that needs regeneration. It is our soul that needs changing. You know what? The cross of Christ is the greatest sign of God's redemption of the world. It is staring you and me in the face. It is the salvation of God hidden in plain sight. But yet not everyone will see it that way. Because if you see it through human eyes, if you see it through human wisdom, it is foolishness to you and you will discard it immediately. Paul is saying here, we preach Christ crucified. Those words, Christ crucified, are amazing words because they are oxymorons. Christ, the word Christ literally means the Messiah, the anointed one of God. The word Christ represents power, it represents majesty, it represents splendor, it represents sovereignty. That's what the word Christ represents. But the word crucified represents weakness, it represents death, it represents humiliation. And putting those two words together is like an oxymoron. Christ crucified. And that's why he says Christ crucified is a stumbling block to many people. You know what a stumbling block is? The word stumbling block literally means a trap that used to be set for animals back in the day. And so you had this block that held up the trap. And as the animal came, it would stumble on that particular block. And then the trap would close on the animal. This is what Paul is trying to say. Christ crucified is a stumbling block for so many people. Because as they stumble upon a man dying on the cross, they stumble upon the trap or the stumbling block of human wisdom. And as they stumble upon the cross, the trap of human wisdom closes on them, and they're not able to see the cross of Christ for what it is. Salvation, friends, comes to us in the most unexpected way from the most unexpected person. In John 1:45-46, it says, Philip found Nathanael and told him, "We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and so did the prophets, Jesus, the son of Joseph from Nazareth." "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Nathanael asked him. "Come and see," Philip answered. That's what's going on. You know, Philip tells Nathanael, "We have finally found the Messiah, the anointed one of God, who is going to come and save us." And basically, and Nathanael asks him, "Where is he from?" And Philip says, "From Nazareth." He's like, "Oh, Nazareth. What good can come out of Nazareth?" Salvation comes in the most unexpected ways, from the most unexpected person. All of you guys who are South Africans, we love Nelson Mandela, don't we? He was the man for the hour in the year 1994 because we were expecting civil war, we were expecting riots, we were expecting black on white violence and white on black violence because of apartheid and what happened in South Africa. And what South Africa needed was a man who would come and broker peace, a man who would bring about reconciliation between the two parties. Yet, my friends, Nelson Mandela is not from the great city of Johannesburg. He's not from the great city of Durban or Cape Town or any one of the capitals of the provinces. No, Nelson Mandela is from a little town called Mvezo. You've not even heard of it before. He's from a town called Mvezo. Population in 2011, 11 years ago, was 810. Man, some churches are even bigger than that, right? From the most unexpected town came a man who would ultimately be a crucial man in the life and times of South Africa. Salvation comes from the most unexpected way. I want to implore with you today, will you choose to look at Jesus Christ on the cross from a different angle? Because that's the one side, it's the foolishness of man, and therefore the cross of Christ is a stumbling block. But then Paul carries on in verses 24-25. He says, "Yet," here's the other side of Good Friday, "Yet, to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God, because God's foolishness is wiser than human wisdom, and God's weakness is stronger than human strength." This is what Paul is saying. This is the other side of the cross. Those whom the Spirit of God has shown them the meaning of the cross. It is the wisdom of God. It is the power of God because Jesus Christ died on it. You see, a cross is just a wooden block, right? It's just a cross. And thousands of people have died on a cross. But what makes the cross of Christ special is because Christ died on it, the Son of God. And as he was hanging on the cross, he was absorbing God's wrath on your sin and my sin, because he was the sinless Son of God who lived a perfect life on our behalf. And he transferred that perfection and that righteousness onto us who would believe. But yet as he was dying on the cross, he was incurring the penalty of sin that you and I deserve. And because our penalty has been paid and it is finished, we can be reconciled back to God. We can be at peace at God. We can have access to heaven because the Son of God took upon himself the wrath of God at the cross. Jesus died for our sins. That is what makes the cross of Jesus Christ beautiful. That is what makes it alluring, and those who can see the meaning of the cross, what it is the wisdom and it is the power of God. As Christ was dying a natural death, a supernatural transaction was taking place, and that's why it needs supernatural eyes for you and me to see the true meaning and the beauty of the cross of Christ. Friends, I want to tell you today that the cross of Christ is God's demonstration of love to a dying world. Let me say that again. The cross of Jesus Christ is God's demonstration of God's love to a dying world. I love what Romans 5:8 says. It says, God proves his own love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Christ did not die for us whilst we were loving him, whilst we were adoring him, whilst we were cheering him on. No, whilst we were still sinners, whilst we were in our state of rebellion, whilst we continued to shake our fists at God, whilst we all turn away from God and do our own thing, Christ died for us to reconcile us back to God. This, my friend, is the greatest act of love in the history of mankind. Our salvation, your salvation, my salvation is hidden in plain sight. The one side of Good Friday is those who see the cross of Christ as foolishness. And the other side of Good Friday is those who see the cross of Christ as the wisdom of God and the power of God to save mankind. So my question to you today as I wrap up is, which side are you on? Because the cross of Christ is the defining moment in the history of the world. It will determine who goes to heaven and who goes to hell. It will determine who goes to eternal life and who goes to eternal death and eternal destruction. The cross of Christ is the most important event in the history of mankind. And my question to you is, which side of the cross are you on? Let me pray for you. Lord Jesus, I thank you so much for those who have watched this message, for those who are on the right side of the cross. I pray, Jesus, that they be encouraged knowing that the cross of Jesus Christ is not just salvation for them, but it's what changes them. It is what defines them. It is what grows them in maturity in the faith. And I pray for those who are watching, Lord, who are on the wrong side of the cross, who think it is just a man dying on a cross, it is just a man dying a horrific, brutal death on a cross. I pray that you'd open their eyes. I pray, Jesus, that your Spirit would open their eyes so that they may see the beauty and the majesty of the Son of God dying for their sins at the cross. Please, Jesus, do your work in their hearts. I pray in Jesus' mighty name. Amen. Thanks for watching our Good Friday message. I hope you've been encouraged. Please check us out in the next couple of days. Our Easter Sunday message will be coming out. Please like this video. Please share this video as well. Please click subscribe. Otherwise, have a great Easter weekend, and I'll catch you soon in our Easter Sunday sermon. Cheers.